So I want to go to my guests. We are joined with John Helmer. John, welcome to the show, man. How you doing today? You doing all right?
Thank you very much for having me, Jamal. Glad to be here.
No, thank you for joining me. I deeply appreciate it. John Helmer, he's the longest continuing serving foreign correspondent in Russia and the only Western journalist to direct his own independent bureau, absent of national commercial ties. He's a regular presenter on Russian topics in China, Western Europe, and the United States, and has published several books in the United States on military and political topics, including essays on America presidency on urban policy in the United States, followed in book compilations in 1981, 1982, essays on Greek and Middle Eastern politics between 1986 and 1989. And since 1989, he has published almost exclusively on Russian topics. John, I followed your column, Dances with Bears, for a while.
Mm.
And so this is a great honor that you can join me on this one. I really appreciate it.
Well, honor's a big word, Jamal. But let's get to the facts, eh?
Fair enough. Fair enough. I sent a few questions, but let's start with this one. The new push for quote negotiations unquote. Now, Axios came out with this. Financial Times followed up with this, and there is, according to them, a quote 28-point plan. Some people have described it as a surrender document for all intents and purposes. Give me your take on this. Do you put any credibility behind this? Witkoff and Kirillov has been in conversations about this apparently. And I mean, this is in the middle of all sorts of chaos that's taking place in Kiev right now. Umarov apparently has fled the country. Well, a rumor has it that Umarov has fled the country. The energy minister has fled the country. There's belief that Yermak is on his way out. Zelensky is apparently flown to Istanbul to meet with Witkoff. Do you put any credibility behind this notion of a, quote, 28-point plan, a peace initiative? Oh, by the way, and the Russians say they have no idea what they're talking about.
Well, lots of questions there, Jamal. Let's try to sort them out for our audience. Let me make it kind of clear, because you introduced it, that folks at home can disagree with us, disagree with me, and to assist you to disagree with me or to confirm with me what we're talking about. There's the website Dances with Bears that goes up for this program immediately afterwards, and we'll see all of the written materials that you've just referred to and more. So, taking that as a reference, this is the short read of what I think is happening based on talking to my Russian sources about what's happening. The Russian view is that the US is in retreat, that Trump is retreating. Trump cannot appear in front of his MAGA constituency. He cannot appear in front of himself to be anything less than a winner of wars. You know, he has portrayed himself not only as the peacemaker deserved the Nobel Prize, but let me just quote you what he said on the deck of the USS Harry Truman in celebration of the birthday of the US Navy just a few weeks ago. Listen to this. We quote Trump, "We won World War I. We won World War II. We won everything in between." I'm looking down to read it exactly. These are his words. This is Trump talking. "We won everything before. In Vietnam, the Navy unleashed Operation Rolling Thunder and deployed a brand new unit, the Navy SEALs, to tear up the Mekong River Delta. With Vietnam, the problem was, we stopped fighting to win. We would have won easy. We would have won easy in Afghanistan. We would have won every war easy, but we got politically correct." I'll finish there. This is a man who believes that sort of stuff. The problem is that coming up against a serious and real army like the Russian army, he's losing. And gradually, the message is getting through to him. It's gotten through to Vice President Vance. and it certainly got through to Stephen Witkoff, basically a bagman for President Trump and his family. What they have leaked, this 28-point plan corresponds to the 31-point plan, which the Russian side tabled in the beginning of June in Istanbul when it was meeting the Ukrainian delegation. If you take out 3 of the points at the end of the Russian plan, which were, this is how it'll be ratified, this is what the effect is of the signing points at the end of that document, you've got 28. 28 points now represents the Russian framework for ending the short war. And I have to emphasize that what we're talking about here is a settlement of the short war. There are several major Russian documents that go back to 2021 that would resolve and end the long war that Russia understands it is being forced by NATO and the United States to fight, and not simply on the Ukrainian battlefield. The short war is coming to an end because Russia is winning definitively and is advancing across westwards, up and down the line. The Ukrainian forces don't know which way the Russians will come. And there's deep strikes, including last night, as far deep into the west as Lvov. So what the Russian sources believe is happening is this. There have been several tracks for negotiation. On the one hand, there's the Lavrov Foreign Ministry track. On the other hand, there's been the Witkoff Kirill Dmitriev track that basically represents, on the Russian side, Dmitriev represents the old oligarchy, the structure of business that wants an end to the short war as quickly as possible and relief from the sanctions so they can get back to business as usual. I have to point out that there is a rising economic power. You could say a new oligarchs, but that's not quite right, which is Russian commitment to the militarized economy, quite different from the old oligarchy. And they understand that Russia must continue to fight a long war. The US has no interest in the major disarmament START treaty type negotiations, and has in fact no interest in negotiating anything except extracting itself from this losing war. And that, therefore, what the Russians see and what's leaked into Axios, Politico, the Financial Times yesterday are basically the Russian outline presented in June for demilitarizing the Ukraine, for confirming the four regions, not simply Donetsk and Lugansk, but also Zaporozhye and Kherson, and of course Crimea. A deep demilitarized zone between their borders and across the Dnieper River to the west, in which would be demilitarized. That is to say, no heavy weapons, no capacity to fire long-distance rockets, drones, or missiles into the new Russia or into the hinterland of traditional Russia. Okay, so then there'd be no NATO base, no US intelligence or Anglo-American intelligence sharing or European intelligence sharing to feed that long-range attack capability into Russia. That's the structure. I could go on with it, but and you can read some more in Dance with Bez if you want more detail. But essentially what's happening here is that Trump's covering his retreat by kicking up sand, by making it look as if he's initiated these terms. In fact, the record shows from 2021, when the Foreign Ministry presented its long war resolution, a non-aggression pact with NATO, a non-aggression pact with the United States, and that was rejected by the Biden administration. Since then, President Putin presented in June of 2024 the simple version of the solution on the Ukraine battlefield, and we've had the negotiations in Istanbul, followed by the Anchorage summit. Now, the Russian side thinks that there were understandings reached, but we know from the record that President Trump and others, Treasury Secretary Bessent, for example, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, have all flip-flopped and made it appear as if no understandings were reached. The Russian reaction to the so-called leaks of the new 28-point plan has been to say, on the one hand, that Maria Zakharova, the spokesman for Foreign Minister Lavrov, has said, we've seen lots of these articles. They're not coming to us. There's no negotiation with the foreign ministry. Dmitry Peskov, spokesman for President Putin, I'm looking down to give you the right language, said yesterday, Moscow and Washington are not working on any new initiative regarding the Ukrainian settlement beyond the agreements, plural, reached by President Vladimir Putin and U.S. leader Donald Trump in Alaska. As for the new U.S. negotiator who's surfaced instead of General Kellogg's been fired and has announced he'll be retiring in January. Okay, that's a Christmas present. Kellogg's going out with Santa Claus. But he's been replaced by serious people. Kellogg is a loser of a general and a retiree. But the U.S. Army Secretary, Daniel Driscoll, has been accompanied to Kiev with two serious generals, active service military officers. And this is a significant change in the way in which the Kiev regime, the Zelensky regime, the Zelensky, Yermak, Budanov regime has been presented with the facts. So the Russian side thinks Driscoll's appearance with the two generals, sorry, I've had their names in the top of my head today, but I have to also remember everybody else's names, so pardon me for forgetting. The fact is that Kellogg is out, and Kellogg represented what the Europeans, particularly the British, and Zelensky wanted to come back to Washington. This time, Driscoll, the U.S. Army Secretary, a good university chum, Yale University chum of Vice President Vance, has gone with active service generals to tell Zelensky, this is it, you're losing, and we can't save you. So these are the terms. Now, what President Putin's spokesman Peskov said yesterday was that there are no plans for communicating with Driscoll. What's that mean? It means that Driscoll's job was to tell the Ukrainians it's over. And if you don't agree now, you'll have even less, including you may be dead. So there's been a significant shift in U.S. approach. It hasn't been seriously negotiating with the Russian framework, the 28, the 31 points, okay? Not serious since June, flip-flopping. This time, because the Russian advance on the ground, the Russian advance with the electric war campaign far into the west as far as the Polish border has been now accelerating. So the message is getting through to Trump. If he doesn't stop it soon, he will not only have inherited Biden's war, it'll be his war, but it'll be his loss. Yeah. His loss. And that Trump can't bear personally. And when you look at the the polls, he's already suffering serious reversals in the polls. Nothing he's doing, none of this alleged peacemaking stuff, has made any difference to the serious negative approval rating. He can't get better voting support out of, quotes, peacemaking. Why? Because most Americans, and you know very well, Jamal, are preoccupied with his dismal approach to inflation and all the domestic issues.
Yes.
So we've got a retreat. That's it, folks. Trump's losing. Trump's running away. Now, that's not going to be a headline you'll see in the mainstream press, is it?
It's not, but it sounds more accurate. What do you think the chances of this going through? I mean, up to this point, we've seen these kind of, I don't know, on and off peace attempts, quote unquote, for the last, 8 months, 9 months. Do you think this time around it's different? Because this time around, it seems that the Russians are asserting themselves so much more so on the ground, not to mention the budgetary issues that Ukraine is suffering.
I think you put it very well, Jamal. I can't put it better. The Russian side has demonstrated that it's not going to budge on the terms. If the US side doesn't come to terms, and let's forget immediate ceasefire and all the stuff that the Europeans have insisted on when they were sitting in the Oval Office, whether it's Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, or Alexander Stubb of Finland, or the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, or what have you. Leave that. That's gone. It's going. Now, we'll probably come in a minute to why they won't accept that it is going. But Trump's getting there first. He can't afford to be seen to be running away. He can't afford to lose. He hated the prospect, remember, he often said it, of Biden's rout in Kabul, the sight of U.S. Aircraft and U.S. personnel being rushed at the planes as the Kabul occupation for so long collapsed overnight, as it were. So he can't afford anything like that. And he's getting there quicker than the Europeans. And the Russian point of view is that he's getting the message, and therefore there will be a coming to terms, which is what they thought and what Putin thought happened in Anchorage.
How could the Russian trust this? I mean, I would say there's a lot of people on my channel who will look at this and say to themselves, the United States has effectively flaked or lied about every deal that they've been went into. I mean, how would they ensure that this is legitimate?
Well, you're right again, Jamal. I mean, this is about war. It's not about words. Words on paper are promises, promissory notes, and Trump has an entire career of failing to deliver on promissory notes, doesn't he now?
Yeah.
So this isn't about trust, it's about war. And the war is the short war, because this is not an end to the US, German, British, Baltic. I mean, we could go up the northern front. I'm waving my hands around, pointing at the non-existent map. This isn't about the US pulling out of its war aims, its war fighting aims against Russia in Europe, its war fighting aims against China in Asia, its war fighting aims against Iran and the Palestinians in the Middle East, and so on. Those wars are not over. That's the long war. This is to pull out before there's a Kabul type disaster, for a political disaster at home for the folks at home, or a Saigon 1975 kind of disaster. This is what the US side is doing. Now, on the Russian side, and you mentioned it again, and thanks for mentioning it, Jamal. You've got different channels. You've got Kirill Dmitriev leaking and speaking to what is it called, Politico,
Right.
and Axios, saying he'd been closeted with Stephen Witkoff in Miami for 3 days, and nothing out of program. Well, there are factional jealousies on the Russian side, and they represent different elements of thinking about what the solution should be. Don't take that stuff seriously. Take what's happening on the ground seriously. And I think that's the answer. Your question was a good one. Can the Russian side or can either side trust each other? No, but capitulation, something else. Possession of the territory is 9/10 of the law here.
Yeah. It's a capitulation. What are the Europeans getting out of this? I've watched I've been, I don't want to use the term confused, but for all intents and purposes, Europeans have stumped their feet without, I think somebody used the term, without any swords, and have effectively said no to pretty much everything. And yet they don't have the military capability to do pretty much anything on the ground, and yet they continuously said no. And this is as their economies fall apart, as German economy goes belly up. What is their end game in this? What are they trying to accomplish with this? I mean, despite the fact that the Ukrainian military is collapsing on the ground.
Well, each country's different. Yeah, we don't have time to go through the politics of each country. So let me try and sum it up. Maybe I could say, to take your last phrase, what's the European end game? The European end game is not to have an end game. After all, politics is a short-term business. You've got, let's say, Chancellor Merz in Germany got at the last German election less than 28% of the vote, and he rules a weak, divided coalition. Yeah. President Macron of France can't get much more unpopular. I think the polls show less than 15%. I've seen numbers like 11%. You don't get less popular than that. And essentially, he rules by decree, by manipulating the French constitution, dividing and ruling a divided Assemblée Nationale. He rules as a weak ruler by decree and appears to be strong. Prime Minister Starmer in England won a landslide election, has lost almost all of that support, and risks losing to the Reform, this new party of Nigel Farage, is currently polling better than the governing Labour Party. So, and we could go to the Netherlands, we can go to Finland, we can go to Belgium, we can go to Italy, we can go to each of these countries. And what we're looking at are relatively weak coalition regimes, which are trying to avoid the next election or losing the next election. What are they committing to? Well, first, they can't allow the United States to ruin their economy even more with Trump's sanction schemes. This is disastrous for them, and he knows it. So he's extorted the so-called 5% increase in GDP, for defense spending, which is a classic gangster extortion, because that extra 5% defense spending to protect them from damage to their domestic economy through U.S. tariffs must be spent on buying U.S. arms. Yeah, this is the deal. Okay, I'm sure you have in previous programs explained this very clearly. Well, what's the politics of that in each of these weak political regime countries? The politics of it is to make politically successful this type of militarization. And you can see it in Germany, pardon me, the big winners of this militarization of the German army, are major German arms builders like Rheinmetall, ThyssenKrupp, and others. If you look at their share prices, they're terrific. They multiplied 3 times the share value in the 3 years of since the war began in the Ukraine in earnest. So the militarization for Germany serves domestic economic interests, and they're cashing in on it. First, second, that translates into regional voting patterns. Yeah. So the idea is to make enough people satisfied, or that this war can go on because they profit from it. At the same time, you have near total command of the mass media in each of these countries. Each of these countries have successfully persuaded the voters that to believe that Russia wants to invade them, attack them. The British have been persuaded by the Novichok fantasy that Russia will come and launch chemical warfare attacks as they did in Salisbury back in 2018. It goes on and on. The Polish, we've seen the Polish leadership recently blame the Russians not only for flying drones into their airspace, not killing anybody, by the way. They now blame a bunch of two Ukrainians who ran across the Belarus border and put a few hefty pieces of metal on a railway track to prevent the trains moving. And this is blamed on Russia and the ambitious foreign minister of Poland, Radek Sikorski, who wants to be prime minister with this sort of doctrine, makes it clear that the Russians are to blame. The Russians are to blame. Well, Polish voters aren't so stupid, but this ideology is pervasive in each of these countries. The mass media accept it, and the regimes generate significant economic gains for themselves, their political supporters, their corporate supporters. So in each country, the economics and commerce of continuing the war keep these regimes in power. What must not happen for them is the same problem that Trump faces. They must not face a decisive capitulation in Kiev. A capitulation, Zelensky jumps on a plane and goes to Israel, or almost worse, the Syrskyi, the general commanding, is replaced by one of the Azov candidates, the Azov, the neo-Nazi groups, Beletsky or one of the others. If there's a revolution from the neo-Nazi direction, that would limit the Ukraine to basically a rump state ruled out of Lvov. And the Europeans can't accept that the collapse of Zelensky, the collapse of Syrskyi, they can't accept a regime change like that. Okay? So they don't want an end game. That was your term. They don't want to come to an end game because they're profiting at the moment. And they've got to stretch the moment into the next election cycle. That's my understanding. And I think it's the Russian understanding of why the Europeans are as adamant about continuing the war. They simply can't accept now that they're losing.
But their economies are taken, like, if you look at the number of jobs, for example, that Germany has been shedding, they've been bleeding jobs, like hundreds of thousands of jobs. France, they were screaming headlines that France and the UK were needing a bailout from the IMF. That's how bad their economies were effectively doing. As you point out yourself, all of these governments are effectively very weak governments. Starmer's like 30 points underwater, if I remember the latest polling on him. It doesn't seem like this has been a benefit to any of these countries in an economic sense, in real terms, or in a political sense.
You're right. You're right, Jamal. It's not a benefit for the country as a whole. It's not a benefit for majorities of the populations, but it's a super benefit if you run Rheinmetall. Your shareholding, your share prices jump by a magnitude of 3. Your bonuses, your take-home pay, all of that stuff is you're in a boom. You're in a boom, and it's not just the big arms companies, the little ones who want to list on the stock exchange and generate the kind of share price gains, which turn into worker salary increases. Yes, they also turn into much bigger bonuses for the executives. And some of these companies, it's not so clear in Germany, but in the United States, where military defense companies are prospering in much the same way, they're paying dividends, pardon me, by borrowing against their future procurements from the US government. In other words, so long as there's, war making is a government priority, and the defense budget gets bigger and bigger. Some of them aim to make money on the Golden Dome in space, some of them, and so on and so on and so on. So long as there's the perception of, rising defense spending by war against Russia or China, major companies like Lockheed and major defense contracting companies borrow money to pay their shareholders dividends and bonuses. It's essentially a cycle of militarization in which you get a narrow group of people. It's narrow. You're right. The majority of the populations in each of these countries, including the United States, understand they're suffering from this. But look at what happens when they protest. You have the same kinds of repressive tactics that we call ICE in the United States on the streets of DC or Chicago or LA or Seattle or wherever, or Memphis, Tennessee, and with a whole other list of cities to come. Similar repression in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
You can hardly open your mouth like you and I are talking in Germany without somebody filing a complaint with a local city prosecutor and popping you into court facing major fines and possible imprisonment.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I'm curious on something else. In the old days, I remember Colonel McGregor made a point of saying in the old days, the United States would tell Europe, this is what we're doing, and Europe would just kind of fall in line. Do you see that happening this time around? If Donald Trump is indeed sending his people to effectively tell Zelensky, this is what you're doing, you're losing, you're failing, we can't save you, etc. This is the deal. We need you to accept this deal. Does he have the capability? Like, meaning, how much influence do the Europeans have in, let's say, either putting the kibosh on this deal, stopping this deal, etc.?
Well, here we are on a Thursday, and we don't. You said it right at the beginning, Jamal. We don't know what will come next. Let's just say for the last few months, the Europeans have been very effective in persuading Trump to flip from what he described as a grand settlement for the security of Europe to immediate ceasefire. I mean, he's actually said, I don't support immediate ceasefire because they don't hold unless you get a much more profound and comprehensive security deal. I mean, perfectly reasonable, common sense. He took that position and then reversed himself. You've got to give the in answer to your question, you've got to say the Europeans successfully persuaded him to change his tune. But he changed his tune for his reasons, not for theirs. Mm-hmm. And he has to believe he controls Starmer, he controls Macron, he controls Merz by the force of the tariff war. And until and unless the US courts rule that Trump's use of the tariff weapon domestically is unconstitutional and blocks the use of the tariff war in that fashion, until that happens, Trump's use of the tariff weapon makes Europe behave itself. It can persuade him for his reasons, but he can't believe that they're being persuaded. He thinks he can persuade them for his reasons.
Right. Interesting. If we are looking at the U.S. do this kind of new push for a deal, does that imply that this attempt to seemingly weaken or get rid of Zelensky, the political chaos that's taking place in Kiev, is coming out of the U.S., or do you think this is coming from somewhere else?
No doubt, and no doubt that most of this attack on the corruption around Zelensky is coming from the U.S. The origins of the two, let's call them anti-corruption groups, NABU, the investigative force, and SAPO, the prosecution force. The origins of those groups was the Biden administration, George Soros, and the USAID program. I can recommend, I'm a Russia correspondent, and and my ability to look inside Ukraine internal politics, let alone what's happening on Bankovo Street, where the Ukrainian government hangs out, is limited, very limited, and has got weaker over the years. So if you go back to Dances with Bears between 2014, let's say, and 2017, I did focus a great deal on the corruption of Igor Kolomoisky, stealing billions of dollars, diverting them from the National Bank of Ukraine through Privatbank and into a whole range of assets that inside the Ukraine. The Kolomoisky versus Viktor Pinchuk oligarch battle was fought out in the British courts to some extent, and that enabled me to get access to a lot of records. When they stopped litigating against each other, my access has been much more limited. But there are good Ukrainian coverage that you can see. Okay, Peter Korotayev writes a Substack called Events in Ukraine, and he has a capability to understand and describe the faction fighting. There are two factional fights going on. One, the one you mentioned, Jamal, around Zelensky. Between Zelensky, it's a succession fight for political power between former President Poroshenko and Zelensky and his advisors, particularly Andrei Yermak. The level of corruption actually identified is relatively small. I've called it elsewhere, chicken feed by comparison. You know, the Timur Mindich character, it has been stealing dozens of millions of dollars. But we're talking about a bigger level of corruption that's billions and billions of dollars. The Mindich scandal, which has been gripping the Western press as well as the Ukrainian press, it doesn't and won't remove Zelensky. It's designed to soften him up, not replace him. That's Korotayev's conclusion. It's a reason on the evidence he presents, and folks can go to Events in Ukraine, Substack, Korotayev, and you'll read it. And it's very it shows a level of understanding of Ukrainian politics. You have to be, it helps to be Jewish, it helps to have been born in Dnipropetrovsk, and it helps to know how to steal millions and billions of dollars. Those are the three qualifications for understanding Ukrainian politics right now. But relying on his sources, Korotayev takes the view that this is a limited, call it a limited hangout, anti-corruption operation to soften Zelensky up without removing him. One. The second succession operation is only partly connected, and that's the general staff, whether General Syrskyi can survive as the commander, whether General Zaluzhny, now essentially a British asset sitting in London, comes back either as a political leader or as a military leader, or whether military power passes from Zelensky, Syrskyi, Budanov, the head of the group, the intelligence service, whether it passes from them to the Azov battalion, the neo-Nazi groups, with who remain fanatically committed to fighting Russia forever. I can't tell you. I don't know how it works day by day, and I can't tell you that the two succession fights in the Ukraine, the military one and the civilian one, the Zelensky versus the Azovists, the Banderists, how it will pan out. I can't tell you that. And we don't yet know whether the US intelligence agency, the British intelligence agency, the French and the others have a view about who they would like to see emerge in the general staff and in the civilian leadership. We haven't seen any of that yet. What they must achieve is softening up Zelensky to come to terms to stop the Russian rush at Kiev.
But would the Russians accept Zelensky, that government remaining in power? It seems like we're just okay.
No, one of the terms in the 31-point Russian plan is there must be an end to mobilization. There must an end to martial law. Once martial law comes off, presidential rule by decree comes off, mobilization stops. There must then be an election. And the Russian side has repeatedly said that no longer refers to Zelensky as the president. I don't refer to him as the president because he doesn't rule with constitutional legality. So the Russian view is there must be an election. Who would win that election is another matter. There are Russian candidates. There are Russian-supported candidates. People, good people like Oleg Tsarov, who's has been a Ukrainian presidential candidate whom Kiev tried to murder, who lives in Crimea and writes a very interesting telegram roundup each day. Folks at home can look up Oleg Tsarov, Tsareb. He's a candidate. He's a potential candidate, but seen to be rather close to the Russian side. There'll be others in the middle. There'll be others on the right. Let's put it this way. If you look at the combination of the Russian plan, I'm waving my hands around because it's kind of complicated. I'm pointing in different directions. If the Russian plan of the 31 points is adopted in full and all the pieces work together, you've basically got the 4 regions plus Crimea remain Russian as they are now constitutionally. Second, you have a demilitarized zone in which you have no threat to Russia. Then you have a limited Ukrainian security force for domestic security purposes, but which cannot become a threat to the neighbors, but principally Russia. You have an election, and essentially you've got an election for a rump state. And you may find that that rump state peels off because the Odessans will say, we're better off joining Russia than staying with the rump state that's either based in Kiev or based in Lvov. The same may happen in Kharkov, and the same may happen in Dnipropetrovsk. In other words, from Russian point of view, if Russia can be patient, and if the risks of continuous warfare are diminished significantly, those parts of eastern Ukraine will vote their wallets, will go where the money is, will go where the reconstruction investment will come from, and that's Russian.
Is part of the softening operation getting rid of Yermak? Is that, I mean, he's been Zelensky's chief of staff. They've called him Zelensky's brain of sorts. And now the rumor has it that he is on his way out. Or do you accept that? Or do you buy that?
I'm old-fashioned, Jamal. I can't cope with rumor. And
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Okay.
Fair enough.
I mean, it just, the standard of the journalism that applies in Russia as everywhere has got to be the courtroom standard, evidence beyond reasonable doubt or evidence on the balance of probabilities. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the faction fighting, as I said, in the Ukraine is best described by Ukrainians. That's not right. Me. I don't know enough to answer your question.
That's perfectly fair. One last question on this. The Putin-Russia, Trump-Putin summit in Alaska. I've been fascinated by that. It sounded as if, at least to me, when Trump and Putin came out, that there was some kind of deal, that there was some kind of agreement. Lavrov has continuously talked about this as being an agreement, and he has been, I'm not going to say spilling tears over it, but effectively over and over again saying, we had a deal, we had an agreement, we had an understanding of sorts. Yes. And of course, Trump immediately went back on it. Was there an agreement? Was there an understanding between these two that Trump eventually pulled back on? Like, meaning, it sounded as if when they gave their speech that there was something on the table, that Witkoff came with a deal. And the reason why I'm asking this, because this is the way I understood it at the time where they were giving their speech together at the summit. Witkoff came with a deal. The Russians maybe amended, updated, or basically gave their take on it. The Russians were waiting for a response. Trump's response was effectively enacting an oil war where he was going after the Russian energy sector, not to mention trying to get India in order to stop using Russian energy. Start screaming about tomahawks. And you get Lavrov saying, well, we were waiting for him to respond. And my thing was, well, he sounded like he did respond. Yes. Was there something on the table at the time?
You put it very well. And I have to agree with your account. Let's just remember there's some peculiarities about that summit. In the first place, it was supposed to last more than 4 hours. It was supposed to have a luncheon in the larger format, to go from the smaller format of Trump plus Rubio plus Witkoff and the counterparts on the Russian side. Then there was the larger delegation luncheon, and then there was with more discussion. And then there was to be a joint press conference that was scheduled to run for an hour. And pardon me. And then Trump had a scheduled interview with Fox News, I believe. Mm-hmm. Now, what happened was quite different. We know what was scheduled because the State Department papers, the protocol lists, the schedule for everything that was to have taken place, plus the timings, was left in a printing machine and leaked to the press. The press picked up these papers. I've read them, and they showed that for a start, that all of Trump, that Trump basically said, "I've had enough. I'm going home," and he cut the he eliminated lunch. He eliminated the large delegation meetings. He eliminated the large press conference. The press conference was scheduled in the State Department papers I've read for something like 45 minutes. A normal press exchange Q&As with the press for Trump and his guests. It was cut to, if I'm remembering rightly, 12 minutes, and each man read something, and 8 of those minutes I've stick in my head were dominated by Putin reading, and 4 minutes by Trump. Trump conceded that because he had a 30-minute interview with, I believe it's with Heritage of Fox News, but I may be mistaken. He then had 30 minutes with Fox News for his press conference with a reporter who was slobbering all over him. Yeah, so it wasn't a press conference. It was a polish. It was a makeup job to polish his face, and then he got in a plane and went home. So, what can you do in roughly 2 hours? The answer then is what you said. The Russian side insists, as repeatedly said, there were understandings reached, plural, or agreements reached, plural. On the other hand, some senior deputy foreign ministers have said that whatever was understood has been violated. There's been no follow-up. The Americans have failed to do anything that was understood to be moving ahead at the end of the Anchorage summit. They've been, as it were, corrected by endless repetition on the part of Mr. Lavrov and President Putin and their spokesman. Keep reiterating there have been understandings reached, there are agreements reached. Take your pick of which version, because why don't we just accept that the Russian side believed that Putin had presented to Trump in language that Trump understood, that these were the Russian terms, and if he and if the United States and the other powers didn't agree to negotiate the terms and provide the security arrangements Russia wanted, Russia would take them by war on the battlefield. And that was different and important compared to Stephen Witkoff showing up in the Kremlin and discussing terms with Putin, with Dmitriev on one side of the table, Ushakov on with President Putin. It's a different conversation. And not one of the business projects, we're not even talking about the Bering Straits tunnel that Dmitriev surfaced, none of the serious stuff, resumption of air flights between, let's say, Moscow, Washington, and New York, none of that, no improvement in Boeing's or ExxonMobil's relations with Russia. Nothing has materialized from any of the, let's say, business relations that Witkoff talked of at the time. So it was reasonable for Putin to say, for the Russian side to say, well, let's see if Trump understands what Witkoff has been telling us Trump understands. So when they went to Anchorage, they went there at Trump's request. Remember, Putin wanted to meet in Dubai, a neutral position. No, Trump said, I'm only going to go as far as Anchorage. And but which was fine. Symbolically, it meant that Russian president was once again welcome on U.S. territory. So the Russian side wanted to see if Trump understood. And the understanding part seems to me to reflect the fact that Russians believe Trump understood. The agreement part was each of the elements improving the relationship between the two diplomatic corps on each side. The return of Russian diplomatic property in Virginia and in Seattle. All of that stuff would be negotiated. All of it's failed. Wow. Nothing has materialized. So we can say there were agreements to go on agreeing, negotiating, but nothing has materialized. So we could also say that the US side has violated what the Russians believe were agreements. But what we can't say, the core of your question, was there at Anchorage a presentation to Trump and an interaction on the terms for ending the short war, the Ukraine battlefield war? Was that in discussion? My belief is no. Trump didn't get as far as understanding what the terms would be. But now he does, in the sense that now he understands since August the 16th. Let's calculate we're just past November the 16th. August, September, October, 3 months. In 12 weeks, the situation on the battlefield looks far more dire for Zelensky and threatening for Trump than Trump understood then to be the case. You're right, Jamal, you made the point. Trump gets very aggressive in the between towards Putin. I'm disappointed. Every time he'd go in the back of his airplane, he would tell the reporters, I'm disappointed with the guy. And I mean, we accept he repeats himself, disappointed. And then that's followed by, exactly as you said, some tough stuff. I'm going to send tomahawks. You know, it keeps podcasts alive. Every time he opens his mouth like this, tomahawk is tough on the military side. Let's leave aside its feasibility. Then we're going to stop oil trade with everyone who buys Russian oil, starting with Europe, but also with India and China. And we're going to hit them. Well, they did eventually hit Rosneft and Lukoil, and it causes some disruption. But you look at the oil futures price and you see the market understands there'll be some disruption for a few weeks or months, and then the effect of the sanction will be neutralized. Yes, Russia will get less. Against the oil price, there will be a bigger discount for the middlemen. Everybody will make money. Russia will make less. But the war
keeps going.
It doesn't stop.